I'm a pretty skeptical guy, and I'm a pretty practical guy, I think. And when people tell me something, when I get a phone call that says, hey, you just want a trip to Florida, I ask them how many condos I've got to go look at before I get to go to the beach. It doesn't take any specialty to ask questions. And there's a question in front of us tonight. And the question really that I'm going to address is, how much money do we spend and for what? I get it, okay? I get it. As a member of the Board of Selectmen, I understand. I understand people's concerns about taxes. I understand my concerns about taxes. But what we're talking about is, do we spend a lot of money, or do we spend a lot of money and then some? And depending on what side you think is more credible, that's part of the vote. And how we spend money and where that money is spent has a lot to do with the quality of education. So if you bear with me, I'll try not to be too wonky. I'm going to try not to be too much in detail, but I want to share with you some information. And this is information that is not that hard to come by. The MSAD 51 fiscal year budget. All of this is public information. We're going to look at the construction costs for K through 8 facilities built over the last 3 years here in the state of Maine. We're going to look at estimated debt service for the projects initiated since 2012. We're going to look at per pupil tuition for 9 through 12 students. That's part of the plan that's being suggested in terms of withdrawal. We're going to look at the per pupil operating costs for K through 8 schools. And all of this information is available to you just as it's available to me. Maine Department of Education has an extensive data bank. They require that every school system in the state report the information on a uniform basis so that you can look at these kinds of things and assess, is your community spending too much, too little, getting their money's worth? In that budget comparisons, we're going to really structure it in those 6 areas. The debt service obligation, which is the debt that we've got to continue to pay when we withdraw from MSAD 51. The construction costs at K through 8, the high school tuition, the operating costs, transportation costs, buses, etc. And then we're going to talk about the state subsidy. And all of that we're going to compare to the valuation, the assessment that we're paying this year. This year, it costs the town of North Yarmouth $5,485,000 to support the MSAD. That's our share of that school system. First thing is the debt service obligation. That's $883,000. We'd be responsible to continue that debt service obligation because that's what's in place, that's what we signed on when the debt was originated, and we have to make good on that debt. No ifs, ands, or buts. The debt service will reduce periodically because this is a combined debt service. There's been different bonds for different projects and different schools over the years, and it will reduce. In about 12 years, it reduces to about $660,000 a year. And by the year 2030, it will be fully paid off. Construction of a new school. The average school for 500 students, which is what we would be looking at, we're looking at a current population of 488 K through 8, would be $22,414,000. So where did I come up with that? Well, again, the state database looked at similar schools, similar sizes, K through 8 configurations, Woolwich, Chelsea, Jefferson, Durham, all built from 2009, 2010, 2011. And those costs are broken down into a per square foot and a cost per student. And you see that the cost per student is, on average, $44,829. Not too tough. I multiplied that by 500, which would be the design capacity. You know, you'd build a school for a little bit bigger than the 488. That's where the $22 million comes from. That's what it would cost us. Well, we're not going to get money withdrawing from the SAD 51. That's not the way it works. We can go into detail about that, but that's just not the way it works. So we're going to have to finance that. The financing on that, in today's terms, which are very advantageous, if we were going to build something, this would be a good time to build it. It would be $89,000 per million borrowed for a 20-year life cycle bond. That debt service would be $1,994,000. Now, between the $1.9 million and the $880,000, when we get to the bottom line on our budget, that number is going to represent 30% of your education dollar is going to go to pay debt service. That doesn't educate your kids. That doesn't make any kid any smarter. It may incent more kids to be bankers, but it's not going to make them any smarter. Currently, the MSAD pays 10% in debt service. 70% of your dollar go to education, or 90% of your dollars go to education. These things have educational impacts. High school tuition. 209 students at an average for the area. And what I looked at here was the schools in our area. We're not going to send schools, we're not going to send kids to Auburn, or we're not going to send kids to Saco. We're not going to send kids to some far-flung area. It's got to be someplace that's physically manageable. So when you look at the per pupil cost, again, this is the state information as posted on their data site. You look at that per pupil cost, the average of the people that we would go shopping to would be $11,844. 209 times 11,845, $2,475,000. Now let's talk about K through 8 operating costs. 488 students at an average cost of $8,564 per student is $4,179,000. Where did those numbers come from? Again, state database of all of the schools in the state is where I drew this information from. And what I looked for in this category was those schools that would be plus or minus 500 students. It doesn't make sense to compare yourself at 500 students to a school of 2,000, nor does it make sense to compare it to a school of 200. So we picked similar schools that would be in our situation, so we derive a similar cost, a reasonable cost to make a decision of this magnitude. $4,179,000 in operating costs. Transportation, another big area of the budget. Kids are going to ride on buses, probably the same sort of bus. They're going to burn the same diesel or burn the same gasoline. They're going to travel over the same roads. The current budget for the MSAD for the 2,042 students enrolled is $1,275,000. I simply divided that by the number of students times the number of students that we would be responsible for transporting. Seemed like a pretty logical, straightforward approach. That gives you $435,000 of transportation costs, which does not include purchasing the buses to begin with. But we do get a little bit of money back. Every school system gets a certain amount of state subsidy. The state subsidy is essentially driven by the legislative process, and each year the legislature decides how much they will fund, what level of education they will fund, and then the department goes through the process of allocating that pretty much on a per student basis. It gets pretty complex, and I'm not going to suggest to you that this number can be articulated because it changes from year to year. But if you take the MSAD 51 subsidy this year at $10,700,000, and you divide that by the total number of students, and then reallocate it to the students who would be in the North Yarmouth school system, that comes to $6,660,000 of subsidy or income. So what's that give us? Debt service obligation, $883. Construction financing, $1,994,000. High school tuition, $2,475,000. K through 8 operating costs, $4,179,000. Transportation, $435,000. State subsidy, $3,660,000. The total of that is $6,307,000. For those of you inclined to math, that's a bigger number than $5,485,000. That would be an increase of $822,000 per year in education costs for the same number of students as we have this year under the same circumstances. Our mill rate, which is currently $13.95, would go to $15.65. It would be on a $275,000 house, you would have approximately a $468 increase in your taxes if this was in place. These are the kinds of numbers that doesn't take a lot of thought process to say, does this make sense? Where did this number come from? I'm not standing up here telling you what I think education should cost. I'm not telling you what I hope it will cost. I'm telling you what it costs. Right, wrong, or indifferent, this is what it costs. But wait a minute, we're smart people, and as Garrison Keillor always says, you know, all our kids are above average, and the women are more beautiful and the men are stronger. So what if we did everything at the lowest cost of any of the comparables that we picked out? Well, you know what? We'd have a savings. We'd have a savings of $10,000 a year. If everything goes right and the wind is at our back, we'd have a savings of $10,000. However, if you're doing analytics, you look at what it would be on the high side, because that's the bet. What's the return on my bet? Well, you would be betting to lose if it came in at the high end of the cost schedule. Again, these are all the comparables that we looked at earlier. At the high end of the cost schedule, it would cost us up to $2.2 million per year more. Not a very good bet. If you're betting $100,000 and you want to get $10,000 in return and take the chance of having to pony up $2.2 million, I'll take that bet. Now, what I talked about is the stabilized cost of running a school system. Well, that school system doesn't magically appear. There's other costs that we have to consider. One is the withdrawal process. Let's say that it does cost us $100,000. And this is a complex process. You're not going to just walk out there and open a book and, oh, here's how to start a school system 101 and checklist and bing, bang, boom. It's going to cost a lot of money. You're not going to hire your teachers or your administrators on the first day. You've got to administer the construction of that building. Somebody's got to actually take care of that. You're going to have administrative costs to establish the new school organization. You've got to hire and train teachers and staff. You've got to plan curriculum. You've got to do scheduling. You've got to figure out how many kids you're really going to have, where they're going to go, who's going to be on the bus routes. You're also going to have to start up sports programs and extracurricular programs, and none of which you have anything. We do not have those programs in place. We are starting from point zero. Everything is built from scratch, which is great in that we can make it anything we want, but it costs money. It's a choice, and these are the kinds of things we have to think about in weighing that choice. And then again, there's an impact fee potentially to be paid to MSAD 51. So when I look at this, when I look at these numbers, it's fairly clear to me, vote no. It's going to cost us more. It's not a good idea. There's issues to be dealt with. Let's deal with the real issues in a productive way. And thank you very much.